Excellent. So, hello and good evening, everyone. This is Indra, and as introduced by Sam, and I work for METRONOM. Today, for next 40 minutes, I'm going to talk to all of you about no estimation and the estimation in agility. Before I start getting into details, um, let me give you some details about METRONOM. So, METRONOM is the digital hand of Metro AG, and we provide the software and hardware, basically the IT solution to all our Metro customers and Metro shops across the globe. Right, so that's about METRONOM. Now, let me quickly jump into the agenda for tonight. So there are three parts in which I have divided my this conversation. Well, I would like to call it as a conversation because I would like to have more interaction with all of you tonight. So the first part, which I'm going to talk to all of you about the no estimation. Then I'm going to pick up the other side of the river, which is estimation. And the last part, where I will be spending some time talking about some observation, some viewpoints, which I gathered over a period of time for last 6 years or so. And then we try to draw a conclusion on that. I would like to have this as a conversation, as I mentioned, so feel free to ask question, feel free to initiate a conversation, a chat, and let's see what we can learn from each other. All right, so before any topic starts, before any topic comes to our mind, always we ask that why this particular topic? You know what? As an agile coach, one of my responsibility is to ask question to the status quo. Probably we hear this for the many times into our day-to-day work life that it has always been done in that way. But the question it comes to always into my mind that why it has always been done in that way. What will happen if I don't do that in that way or doing some other way, right? So that's one of the reasons which inspired me to get deep dive into the no estimation topic. And there's one more reason also. As part of my job, I facilitate a lot of workshop, being part of a lot of meetings, talk to people. And always when I talk to people, I find one very interesting question from most of them. And they ask me, Indra, what will happen if we don't estimate the stories? If we don't estimate the project, what will happen? Now, these are the two key areas which inspire me to get into this topic of this no estimation, and the result is very fascinating, very exciting, which I'm going to share with you next 30 minutes or so. Right. Let me start talking about with all of you about the no estimation, the no estimation part and the history about it, how it started. Back in 2012, there was an individual called Woody Zwilly who started a Twitter conversation with a hashtag called no estimation. And when he started this conversation, there was a very interesting story behind that. The story was, Woody was a senior consultant in a company called Industrial Logic. He and his team started receiving, tons of requirement documents, and the expectation from all the stakeholders are providing them the estimation. They got pushed, and as a result, they got frustrated, and they took a very radical approach. And what was the approach? The approach was very simple. They looked at the requirement, they found the key story out of it, chunked that story in smaller pieces, and worked on that. And they delivered that to the customer. They show that to the customer become very happy, and they build up the confidence, and that's how they deliver the project. That's was the start. While preparing for the talk today, I actually, listening to a lot of conversation of Udi, and there are a lot of documents back in the internet. And one very interesting statement from him that, he don't think that estimations are bad, but what he thinks that estimation do not deliver the value always. However, as I said, the no estimation was like he initiated the conversation. It was there, but it was not that, it didn't pick up that momentum, but it was become very strong when the thought leaders or IT leaders in the industry, Vasco Durate and Neil Click, they started supporting him. And what they mentioned, what their point of view was, in a large scale, in a complex environment, there are many factors, smaller, bigger, large scale factors, which might influence the project. And when you're trying to estimate the project, you need to either always consider all those factors, but still there could be some factors which might still influence the project, and could contribute in delaying the project or creating or changing the focus of the project. Now, when you have still a lot of those complex components available into the project, do you think is it possible to predict or estimate the cost and time? Now, that was the conversation initiated there. Now, what happened during those days, these Zuil's initiative of this, what actually, if we just look at what Zuil said, what the team did, they just moved the focus by just simply diving into delivering the project. So all this conversation, this process, create a mammoth conversation back in Twitter, and there are a lot of conversation going on this topic. Now, there are reasons, why these no estimate topics become very famous. It got a lot of momentum. And I identified 3 factors into that. If you look into this estimation as a whole, the estimation as a whole is fundamentally guessing what you're doing. You're going to start the project. You probably know the high level scope of the project, or maybe the requirements, and looking at that, going back to your experience, going back to find out if you have did similar kind of project in past, you are actually guessing and providing some time and cost factor to your stakeholders. The second and key important point to me is, does estimate really deliver any direct value to the customer? Customer is coming to you, or the client or stakeholder is coming to you asking for your help. You're providing estimate to them at the end of the day, but that's not the solution what he or she is looking for. And the third and key important factor which I observed is estimates are often misused. There are many organizations. In my last 17 years of experience, I've seen many situations whereby the people like managers and the higher ups of the organization, they are considering these estimates at the commitment, whereas they are guests at the end of the day, and they're considering them as a commitment. And based on the commitment, they're going back to the engineering team or the developers, and they're asking them questions to deliver that. And that creates a dysfunctional environment. That creates mistrust among the team members. So that's why this estimate there was question on the estimates, and this no estimate become very, very the highlighted topic for today. Now, after this, so what do you see? So Julie started this initiative. He started this conversation. He has been supported by the industry leader, and there are certain reasons why people are now promoting no estimate. But then let's see what was the process Jules and his team follow, or what we call as the best practice. Uh, this best practice, what I try to figure out is pretty simple. It's just if you ask me in one line, it's as simple like stop sizing and start developing. So what you need to do is, get the requirement, read your read your requirement, understand that very well, and in that requirement, you need to identify the most important story out of it. Break the story in small chunks and then execute that. Just deliver. That's it. It's pretty simple and pretty straightforward into that. So that's the best practice which I found. Apart from that, also you have like other um, best practices which have been people are using these days, like story mapping, etc. So this is the part which I would like to talk to you about, the no estimate part. Now let's see the other part of the river, and that, as we know, we call estimation. Now till now we talked about the no estimation. Is there any question or any thoughts inside the room?
Feel free to unmute yourselves if you have a question for Indra.
All right. Okay, let's then park the question answer part maybe for the towards the end of the topic. So let me start talking about the other part of the story, which is estimation. A brief history. Estimation is not something new. Probably we are using estimation back in 1960s, and during those days, the estimations was mainly based on regression analysis or derived from mathematical theories. The most what you call the most the common estimation method which probably we're using these days is COCOMO model, and this COCOMO model, which was based out of some research and invented back in 1970 and 1980s. The latest, there was some investigation or research done back in 2000, and the COCOMO 2, which is the latest one on this topic. Now that's in the normal software development life process, but in the agility, because I'm an agile coach, so my emphasis on that area. Back in 2001, we got the Agile Manifesto, and the story estimation process become very famous those days. In my observation, the story estimation become very famous those days. That there is a one of the reason which I can think of. When you try to estimate in a large scale project, if I go back to my days when I used to develop the retail solutions, or used to implement that for different customers. Those days the project used to be used to last for 1 year, 1.5 year, 2 years, and it's really tough to do a estimation of the entire project from the beginning. And what used to happen, after even delivering the project, after working there into project for last 1.5 year, we still used to get requirement, we used to still deliver things at the 11th hour. But after the Agile Manifesto come into the picture, we started working into stories. And the benefit of the story is that it's already divided in small chunks. The scope is limited there. So the estimation is very easy. And most of the time we get the success ratio of a near to perfect estimation in a story is very high. And which is why, in my view, the estimation become very famous. The story scope. And obviously, we invented things like planning poker. Mike Cohen talked about planning poker a lot these days. Then we invented Fibonacci sequences. And the latest invention is using the t-shirt site, the small story, the medium story, and the large story. These methods are actually quicker, but gives us a lot of useful information. Now, that's the history. Again, putting it to the same frame, let me talk on the next is why we should or why people like estimate, or why we like estimate very much. In the world of Agile, there are two areas which I would like to pick up here. One is the complexity, the piece of code which you're going to change, or the piece of feature which you're going to deliver, how complex it is. And the next part is the risk involved into that. When you're going to deliver something, what are the risk factors involved into that? Do you have any dependency from other teams? Is there any changes happening in the version which might impact you? Maybe there are some organizational changes happening in the team which might impact you. Maybe good people are leaving. Maybe knowledge is getting away. So these are the risk factor, and this complexity and risk are the two pillars which have been very well discussed while we estimate, and that's why probably this is one of the very key component in our day-to-day software development lifecycle. Now, there are certain things which we try to find out by doing estimation is how big the work is. Obviously, always we want to know what are the scope of the work, how big it is, and we're trying to compare with something which you have done in the past. Complexity, as I mentioned already, risk, as I mentioned already, involved into that. And then I'm going to talk about the size of the work. What is the size of the work? How big it is? How complex it is? What's the risk involved into that? Do we know that? Can you see the effort involved into that? What's the effort in? What's the few other factors required to know about this? Is the requirement clear to us? Is the story have all this information which we need? Do we have the what and why into that? All these things are required. And most importantly, which is probably a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people want to know when it is going to finish. Now, having said that, one key important thing which me as an Agile coach is always attracting to me is the conversation we generate. When I sit into a planning session and my fellow colleagues, one colleague says that, okay, this story is a 5-pointer, and the other colleague says the story is 8-pointer. And that's the point which excites me. Because what happened there, both of these guys start exchanging their thought process, exchanging their viewpoints. So we ask them, hey, buddy, why it is 5? And then he or she started talking about the reasoning behind it. And he plays that or she plays that in front of the rest of the group across the table. And the other person picks up and justify why it should be an ideal story or the 8 story point. This exchange of thought process, this exchange of discussion, and that also bring other individuals into the board. They also talked about sometimes the high level implementation details. They talked about the different part of the story. They talked about the why and what about the story. And all this conversation really create a good momentum within the team. And the moment we stepped out of the planning session, most of us know high-level implementation detail. And by doing this, what we are addressing? We are addressing one key pillar of agility that's called transparency. We are transparent that most of the team members knows the high-level details of the implementation of the story, and they can talk about it. So that is very fascinating to me. That's is actually very exciting to me. So this is the reason why I think, or in my observation, the estimates are still become very famous, or still is one of the key component of our day-to-day life. Now, having said that, these two parts, this why estimate and why not to estimate, I try to find out or try to think that, how do I know? How do I know that our team is ready to work without estimate? And here is the thought process which I try to put into some points which I'm going to discuss into my next slide. What I believe or my experience says that let's try to forecast the project, or let's try to forecast the topics, and let's try to use the actual elapsed time, to provide what we are going to deliver or when you are going to deliver. If I know that, and then it will be easier for me. The second thing which I would like to highlight is that we should be knowing that what we are going to estimate, what we are going to forecast. What I'm trying to say here, that we should be knowing every details of that particular story, all the important factors surrounded by that, or which can influence that, and we should be knowing everything about our environment. And the third and important thing for me is to like comparison. You should be having enough data points. You should be having enough information gathered within your project, so that when you're going to forecast one particular piece of project or one particular piece of code, you can then look back to your previous experience and try to find out if you have done the similar activity in past and do a comparison there. That's probably a justifiable comparison, and then you can provide some information there. And the last thing, which is actually create a lot of debate, which says that your future and past should be similar to a mirror image, should be reflective to each other. But the debate is that, is it really possible? Because change is the only static thing these days. It's always changing. So my observation is that when we have this fourth thing injected within our DNA, and if I observe these four criteria within this team, probably that's a good time that we can go without an estimate. Now, having said that, I also identified I would say, not so good side of estimate. The observation which I made out of that is, things should be remain same. In today's world, as the continuation of my previous slide, is it really possible to keep things same as it is? I mean, things are changing every now and then. I still remember back then, back in 2013-14, when I delivered a monolithic application, which took like, 1.5 years. And after delivering that, my stakeholder came to me and they told me, the requirement or the market completely changed by this time. And that's why, is it really possible that that things should always remain same? Maybe no. The second point is that the NoEstimate required a lot of experience. Obviously, I cannot get rid of estimation from the day one of my project. I need to, as I said in my previous slide, that if you remember my conversation there, we need to do this like for like comparison. And if we need to do a like for like comparison, we need to have the data points, and data points comes over a period of time. And when you have enough data points, that help us to build our experience. And when you have experience, then we can start thinking, yes, probably we can stop using estimate and we can go without that. As I more or less, I'm bringing my observation as an agile coach. One of the things which I observed, past when I worked with a couple of teams without an estimation, there are two factors which highlighted to me, which create a lot of conversation with myself and the team members. The important conversation that is, it reduces the conversation. I miss that conversation between few individuals where they're talking about, they're thinking the story is 5-pointer, the other individual thinking the story is 8-pointer. I miss that conversation. I miss that exchange of thought process, the high level details, the high level implementation details. And slowly over a period of time, I observe that people are just looking at the high level requirement and start developing that. And in the middle of the development, in the middle of the development, they realize, oh, there are many information which is missing. And they're stopping the development, going back to the product owner and finding out, right, what I do here or what I do there. And that's actually delaying, creating a lot of waste into our development life cycle. The one dysfunction which I also observed is a collaboration. What I always believe that, if I'm working to a sprint, I'm working to a story, and then probably it is taking longer time, my colleague finish his part or her part, and then he or she is helping me. That's the collaboration. But when we stopped using estimation because we are losing this habit of conversation, we are losing the collaboration as well. Well, that's my observation there. Now, these are the not so good side of the no estimate. So let me quickly summarize what we talked till now. So we started talking about the no estimate history, how it started, how Woody started, and then how Vasco and Neil influenced that conversation, how it started in Twitter. Then we talked about, there are certain why the no estimate become very famous these days. And then we talked about the best practice. After that, we changed our focus and we start looking at the other side of the river, where we start talking about the history of the estimation. We identified some of the reason why we should still use the estimation. Then we talked about when we know that, okay, we can probably skip up estimation and just start developing the project. And then my observation of few of the not so good thing about no estimation. Now, having said all these theories, I also built up my experience into that, and I also built up my observations, and which I would like to share with all of you, and which I call a view of an agile coach. As I mentioned in my previous slide, the discussion. This is something which I always emphasize: the transparency, the conversation. In the older days when we used to work in the so-called waterfall environment, we used to write tons of documents. We used to have the business requirement document, we used to have the technical specification document, and somebody writes a code, and then so on and so forth. We got rid of all of them. We invented agility, and we emphasize more on discussion. So for me, the important factor, whether to use estimate or to use not estimate, discussion is the important thing within the team. The next topic which I would like to talk about or highlight is the risk assessment. This is very important for me. Why? Because if I know the risk at the beginning of the project or the beginning of the development life cycle, it's very easier for me, or things will be very smooth. But think of a situation, you're in middle of your coding, your maybe Christmas promotions are in line, you need to deliver something, and suddenly there is a dependency on some other team, and they're going to change some APIs which might impact you. So that's a risk to you. So this kind of assessment is very important, and that's why emphasis on more risk assessment is a very key factor. So that's I would like to highlight to all of you. And the third point to me is that it's basically whether you use estimate or you don't use estimate. But as an agile coach, I would be looking for three key factors there. The three factors which I'll be looking for. The first important factor is which I'll be looking for, what's the maturity of the team. I will try to relate back to my previous slide where I talked about the experience, how experienced the team is, how much data points they have, what is their dashboard. That's the maturity. How much mature this team is. Is there any anti-pattern within the team? Is there any dysfunction? Are they collaborating? What is the level of their conversation? The second thing which I would like to highlight is the problems which facing the team, which is in line with that, the dysfunction things of the team, or the kind of problems that they're trying to solve, and the goal of the team at the end of the day. So based on that, probably I'll take a decision. I will propose to my team that whether to use an estimation or no estimation things, or rather I would highlight them if somebody comes to me. However, if still we are using estimation, I as an agile coach, I would like to advise people to use it with responsibility. As I mentioned earlier, that estimation is more of a guess. So it may not be a good practice to take it as a commitment, as a concrete commitment, and then pushing people to deliver that within the commitment, within the time frame. So use that estimation with responsibility. Next is surprises, which somewhere in line with the risk assessment. So try to avoid surprises as much as possible. If you still have more surprises, probably you're not stable, you're not steady, and the team is not stable yet. So maybe not the right time for using no estimations. Still need to use the estimation on in this kind of situation. And at the end of the day, what I think, we, the agile community, our job is to arrange questions and answers. Use different techniques, use different methods to create this conversation within the team. And then find out what is the biggest resistance. Try to find out the root cause. The benefit for us, we have access to tons of that kind of techniques. And we always try to find out the resistance into that. And then find out the root cause and come to an agreement there. So these are the few things like discussion, risk assessment, goals, problems, maturity of the team, responsibility while using estimation, then surprises, etc. All these things I will keep in mind or I'll factor before I propose to whether you should use estimation or you can go without estimation. Now, having said all these things, I come to almost to the end of my my talk. And after looking at the topics of estimation and no estimation from a distance, I have concluded with two things. One thing I concluded that even in today's world, it's a fact. We need to realize the fact that estimation is necessary for the business. Even if we are opening if we are looking for fund, we need to tell our stakeholders that when you are going to deliver that. So we have to have some sort of estimation there. However, having this conversation, hearing this conversation, reading these documents, books, etc., the situation is like this. The entire debate is actually centered into two areas, or rather, I would say in like this: take your decision based on the situation or based on the case. Use estimation maybe when the team is not very matured, when you don't have much experience, when the future is not very smooth, very tough. Maybe there are a lot of unclarity into the environment. Use estimate. But when things are very matured, when things are very smooth, past and present is more or less same, smooth in manner, probably there is a possibility that you can give it a try. And why not? Because agility is all about adoption. Give it a try of working without estimate and see the result, and then learn from it. So with this, I would like to conclude and take this my viewpoint that in future, when I get an opportunity and if I see this kind of situation, these kind of parameters are satisfying of maturity, problem, goal, smooth future, and compare good amount of experience, I would like to probably try out go without estimation. So that's it. And with this, probably I'll hand over to the question answer sessions now.
Thank you very much, Indra. It was a really, really interesting talk. And we do have already 3 questions that came in through the chat. So I'm going to read them to you. And if people have other questions, feel free to keep them in the chat or to unmute yourselves after I'm done with these 3 first ones. So the first question we have is from Natalia. And she says she's personally curious about the data on the percentage of teams in the industry who don't estimate versus those who do estimate. That's
a very interesting question. And my there is no concrete survey, but what I know, probably 10 to 15% of the teams I have seen into my 17 years of careers, I should not say 10 to 15%. Actually, I worked with 2 teams in past where we did not use any estimate. Now, what's the total data point in industry? I would say probably 10% of the teams maybe don't use estimates these days. But again, that depends upon the maturity, and it changes always.
All right, great. I hope it answers your question, Natalia. We have two other questions from Dave. The first one is estimating small stories in the context of a typical 2-week sprint that accurate? It seems that stuff often gets pushed back to later sprints from time to time.
Let me understand your question. So you're asking me that whether estimating in a 2-week sprint is accurate.
On small stories, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me share my experience. First of all, let me tell you, these estimates are not accurate. They cannot be accurate ever. As I mentioned into my slides, they are guess, and they are based depending upon your experience. They're based depending upon your previous stories. So I would say near to accurate, and the more it is near to accurate, the more the mature the team is. So in a small story, based on your previous experience, by doing a likely comparison, you can reach to a stage where you can call, okay, I'm near to accurate, but I'm not the accurate, because there is no benchmark for the accuracy of estimations.
Dave just joined us. I see you activated your camera. Do you want to take over?
Yeah. So I mean, I just caught my ear that you said it's super accurate, and I think if you've got an experienced team, it is. But I've seen it. It can go wrong. The second question was what I think I was more puzzled about was that I think you were talking about estimating, and then you moved on to forecasting. Were you making a distinction there? I mean, so I get the gist of what you're saying. If you've got an experienced team, it's I was quite. I mean, in the old days, I used to do waterfall development, and it was very painful for all the reasons you've laid out. But I quite like the sort of 2-week sprints, people knowing, and then if it goes wrong, you pick it up within a week or two. So I was a bit surprised by the no estimate movement. It seems that we've reached a happy, sensible level. But you mentioned forecasting, and I thought maybe you were talking more about risk than hours. I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
So I'm trying to emphasize the factor that, if you really don't want to use if you do not want to use the estimate, rather try to use the elapsed time. And if there is a really pressure that somebody's asking you that when you're going to deliver that, use your experience and then use the elapsed times and then provide that, how much, when you're going to deliver the project. So it's talking towards somewhere near to the old days forecasting, which you're talking, David, which probably you're using in the past days. So the forecasting is something similar to that, which I was talking about. Some team these days, they do not use estimates. Rather, they entirely forecast the entire project, and inside the project, they do not estimate the individual stories. They're working that way.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Hi, Indra. First of all, thank you so much for a really insightful and balanced talk. And what came to my mind when I was listening is when you on the slide of why estimate, there are other ways. There are other ways to get those benefits. Like it could have been replaced with why tech design and so on. So something that you talked about in NoEstimation is like collaboration. Have you found other good ways to collaborate in replacement of estimation?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for that. You know what? If we have an estimator mission, it makes my life easy. I don't need to invent or create those chit chat topics for creating this collaboration. But when you talk about asking me about the other ways of creating this collaboration, I can share my experience when in the teams, those teams who were not using any estimate. What we used to create this, we used to have the free flowing conversation. So I used to have, more lean coffee sessions with them, and then create some conversation in that, and try to find out, going from individual to individual, how the one of my colleague can help the other colleague. And that's why you try to do the collaboration there. So that's one way. But I always use estimate because that makes my life easy. Because when you have this conversation into the planning, you're actually 60% of the collaboration done there itself. So that's my experience, which I would like to share with you.
Thank you, indeed. We have another question on the chat from Sambaran, who's asking, one of the key points of Agile Manifesto is responding to change over following a plan. But in most of the cases, 2-week sprints generally focuses on the stories that were picked in the sprint planning and working on it. Do you think this is focusing on the Agile Manifesto, or the sprint planning should be flexible?
Sambaran, thank you for this question. So I would like to highlight Scrum is a guide at the end of the day. It's a guide. It's not a book which is a rule which you need to follow. So as it's a guide, we should be flexible. Right. For example, it's often happens very often. It's a very common scenario in my day-to-day life that we go into sprint planning, we picked up a story, we say it's 5 pointers because in the previously we worked in a similar story in a 5 pointer, and we worked into 2-week sprint and try to finish that. But then we find a surprise into that, and that extended the delivery of the story. Now, when I say this surprise, this is something which you need to retrospect. And during the retrospection, you need to find out, right, what happened now? Why this story, which I delivered previously in 2 weeks time, which was a 5 pointer, and the similar story took more time. That's why you're learning out of it. And that's why you're actually addressing the change, because you learned something that influencing a change to you, and you're implementing the change into the next sprint. So that's why I would say is actually being flexible. By being flexible, you're actually addressing the manifesto.
Thank you.
And Jonathan has also a question for you, Indra.
Yeah. So thanks for the talk. NoEstimates is something that's been interesting to me for quite a while. I remember watching some videos, and I think I even read the book by Vasco Duarte on the topic a couple of years ago. So it's something I've tried to implement or introduce at a couple of workplaces, and I've always gotten resistance. I mean, I think you kind of talked about that at the beginning, that everybody just, it's the way we've always done it, to do story points or whatever. We do planning poker, and why would we change? So usually the complaint I hear about estimating is that it just takes too long. That the team gets around and they spend 2 hours hacking out, is this a 5-point story or a 13-point story? And in the end, nobody really cares how many points it is. They just want to get the work done. And so then that's when I take the opportunity to try to say, well, maybe you could stop doing estimating. And I always get this response of, well, if we don't do estimating, then how will we know how complex the story is? How will we come to this to the agreement? And basically what they're saying is that they feel that the value in estimating isn't that story point value. It's not how many stories they have in their sprint. What they're saying is that what's important is that everybody on the team comes to a common understanding, which you talked about also.
Yeah.
How do you address that? I mean, so next time somebody comes to me and says, "My God, we spent 3 hours working on this story, and I want to give them an alternative. How can I do that in a way that will be useful and that they will understand, rather than just throwing back in my face, sorry, but we have to do it even though it sucks?"
Jonathan, I must say that you are actually a reflection of my day-to-day life. I'm facing that all day. Similar something which I implemented recently. So, we started doing estimation. As you mentioned that, estimation, we had a big workshop, everybody excited about it. we started doing that with a big bang. Yes, we'll do estimate and everything. But one point of time, I started to see the graph is falling down. And then try to find out then what's happening there. And the answer is same. Man, Indra, we are spending 3 hours. What's the use of talking about this 5-pointer, 6-pointer, 8-pointers, whatever it is? So then what I did there, I actually tried to talk with the individual in a one-to-one basis and try to find out what's going on there. You know, very interesting thing what I found out. In theory, they are not against that estimation. What actually they're not liking is that long conversation, and sometimes, or rather in my case, most of the times the conversations are becoming 2 or 3 individual centric. So there actually what I try to implement is that how we can involve all the team members there. That's one thing. Second thing, I actually try to move away from the Fibonacci series. I try to move away these 1, 2, 3 things, and implemented that with a t-shirt size there. So these are the 2 things which I've done with one of my present team. I'm kind of, I would say, I'm lucky that it's still working. But if that doesn't work, I know that I need to bring some changes into that. So probably I'll do something else into that. So as of now, what I did, try to involve as a facilitator into the planning session, try to involve all the members into the meeting by asking questions. Sometimes I poke question to them. Okay, what do you think about it? Or you're quite silent for some time. Why? What do you think about it? So that kind of conversation, and move away from this 1, 2, 3 things, moving completely away of commitment and completed the sprint charts, going to the t-shirt size. And then I see that, okay, it's creating conversation. Yes, I have to do a lot of groundwork for that, having this one-to-one conversation, implemented or refine the definition of ready, refine the definition of done. These are the few things actually help me. But one thing I would say, Jonathan, that my experience that there is no book about it. There's no clear instruction that we need to do 1, 2, 3, 4 things. I personally is a person of doing trying out new things, and so I tried this thing. Probably it will not work after some point of time. Then I have to invent something else. So that's why I will look into this.
One quick follow-up question. Another complaint I hear sometimes, and I guess they see this maybe as a separate issue, but I think you just made it related, is I don't want to be involved in estimating stories that other people work on. This especially happens when there's a clear distinction between, say, front-end work and back-end work, or something like that, or 2 different tech stacks or something like that. And so for example, the front-end guys say, well, this is a database story, so I don't know what's involved. I don't want to be involved in estimating that. How do you respond to that? I mean, I can think of several possible answers, but I'm just curious quickly how you would respond to that, since you suggested getting everybody involved.
So probably this is a situation where the team is not very cross-function. Now, yes, I know your UX will say that, okay, it's a database story, I don't care about that, or the database said it's a UX thing, I don't care about that. In my situation, as I said, I try to be flexible into that, and I try to see the major chunk involved there. And in my case, I try to ask them. For example, I try to ask them that okay, if there is a change in the database, do you guys expect any impact onto the front end, or onto the UX side of it? And if there's really said no, and everybody come to an agreement that's okay, there is no impact into the front end there. So probably I would say that, okay, fine. If you really don't want to do, step aside for now, but be in this conversation, so that if you hear something and if you have an input, then please be open for that. Also, I need to, try to, push, I shouldn't say push, but, sometimes poke people and finding out what to do on that. So it's like a day-to-day job. It's like as and when things come into the plate, take a decision on that. So most of the times, my principle is that, fine, if you don't want to participate into that conversation, but as long as it's not impacting you, you can stay outside of it, but hear this conversation and be opinionative, provide your opinion if you have something to that.
Thank you.
Indra, thank you very much again for your talk. It was,
Thank you.
very, very interesting.
Thank you very much for the interesting questions. I really like them.